Welcome to the deep dive. Today we are staring directly at, well, one of the biggest food paradoxes out there,
hmm
the supermarket tomato.
Right.
I mean, think about it. Doesn't matter the season dead of winter, middle of summer, doesn't matter where you are, that tomato on the shelf,
Yeah.
it looks and almost unnaturally perfect
Perfectly red, perfectly hard.
and perfectly flavorless, usually.
Exactly. And that standardization, that predictability, that's really the key to understanding the whole modern food system, isn't it?
Yeah.
We sort of accept this homogeneity, this lack of actual taste, as, the price we pay for having tomatoes year round.
But that's what we're digging into today, right?
Yeah.
We're unpacking that hidden supply chain.
Yeah.
What are the biological costs, the environmental costs, and maybe most importantly, the human costs needed to get that standard red ball onto our plates whenever we want it.
That's the mission, tracing the journey of this industrial tomato. Where did it even start? Its wild origins are fascinating.
And then how did it end up in these massive chemical-heavy fields in places like Florida?
Right. And we'll see how the whole system, modern industrial agriculture, it fundamentally chose logistics and looks that shiny red color, the firmness, so it ships well.
Chose that over flavor, over nutrition, and yeah, over basic ethics.
Our sources, and we're drawing a lot from some deep investigative work here on the tomato supply chain, they trace that history. They document the, frankly, intense industrial processes, especially in these production hubs,
Like Florida?
like Florida, and they connect it all back to this much bigger story, the whole economic and labor history of cash crops that goes back centuries.
So what you're telling me is that this cheap tomato we just grab at the store,
Yeah,
it might actually be one of the most expensive things in there if you calculate the real cost.
that's exactly the argument. The true cost is hidden.
Okay, so let's unpack this journey. Where do we even begin? The tomato's history isn't what most people think, is it? It's not, like, Italian originally?
Not at all. It's a New World plant. And its story is completely tangled up in the Columbian Exchange. One of our sources cites the historian Alfred Crosby.
Oh, yeah?
He made this huge claim that the mixing of global ecosystems after 1492 was, and I'm quoting here, arguably the most important event since the death of the dinosaurs.
Wow. Okay, that's a statement. Dinosaurs.
It sounds like hyperbole, but think about it. The Columbian Exchange wasn't just trading goods, it was fundamentally biological. Ecosystems that had been separate for millions of years since Pangea split suddenly collided.
You mean plants, animals?
Well, exactly, diseases too. It wiped out huge amounts of localized biological knowledge and completely rewired global diets forever. The tomato is like exhibit A of this global reshuffling.
And the fascinating part, the part that sets up the whole paradox, is where the tomato actually comes from, its native habitat.
If you want to understand how far we've pushed this plant, you need to know its roots. The sources are clear. It originated in the coastal deserts of northern Peru and southern Ecuador.
Deserts, like really dry.
Some of the driest places on Earth. Biologically, it's a desert plant. It evolved for intense sun, minimal water.
Which makes sense why it took off in Europe, right? When the Spanish brought it over in the 1500s.
Precisely. It thrived in the dry, sunny Mediterranean, Spain, Italy, Provence. Those places kind of mimicked its original home.
And early on, they weren't even red, were they? I read something about that.
That's right. The sources mention an early Italian herbalist, Mattioli, who described them as small and golden. He called them mala aurea.
Golden apples.
Golden apples. It tells you about the diversity we lost, before we started breeding them just for that uniform red.
The French called them love apples, pomme d'amour. A bit more romantic.
Always. But not everyone was convinced early on. Acceptance took time.
Definitely not. There's that famous quote from the English barber surgeon John Gerard back in 1597. He called them love apples too, but he wasn't impressed.
What did she say?
He admitted people ate them in sauce, but his medical take. He said they yield very little nourishment to the body, and the same not and corrupt. Pretty damning.
Not incorrupt. So it took a while for the tomato to become the staple we know.
Centuries. But that origin story, that biological need for dry sun, that's crucial, isn't it? Because it makes the modern choice of where we grow most of the U.S. winter supply just completely bizarre.
Utterly paradoxical. If you were
Yeah.
listening to the plant, to botany, Florida would be one of the absolute last places you'd pick. It's notoriously humid, rainy, tons of pests.
So why? If Florida is basically hostile territory for tomato, why is it the heart of the winter supply chain for the whole eastern U.S.?
One reason, and one reason only. Marketing and logistics. Purely. The choice to farm there, especially South Florida, it's not ecological at all. It's geographical.
Location, location, location.
Basically, it's warm when the East Coast and Midwest are frozen solid, and it's within easy trucking distance. That's it. The decision is 100% about delivering a consistent product to faraway markets cheaply year-round. The plant's actual needs ignored.
So we've jammed this delicate desert plant into a swampy, humid, subtropical pressure cooker. I mean, that sounds like asking for trouble. What happens to the plant itself?
It creates a system that requires massive intervention. You force a desert plant into high humidity, and like the sources say, it becomes incredibly vulnerable to all manner of fungal diseases. They just explode in the damp heat.
Fungus everywhere.
And then there are the bugs. Hordes of voracious hoppers, beetles, and worms, chewing on everything, roots, stems, leaves, the fruit itself. So to keep this misplaced crop alive, and importantly, to make it look cosmetically perfect for the supermarket,
You need defenses. Serious defenses.
you need a constant industrial-strength chemical defense system. There's no other way in that environment. And that biological compromise, forcing the plant where it doesn't belong, that immediately dictates the cost, the financial cost and the chemical cost. It's huge.
Okay, let's get specific here because the numbers I saw were kind of mind-blowing. How much are we talking?
According to the figures in our sources, based on industry data, Florida growers typically spend over $2,000 on chemical fertilizers and pesticides for every single acre of tomatoes.
$2,000
Yeah.
per acre. Every season.
Every season. That's not just, a little bit of spray here and there. It's a massive, ongoing chemical investment just to keep the plants alive and looking good in a place they shouldn't be.
And it's not just one or two chemicals, right? It's a whole cocktail.
Oh, absolutely. The variety and sheer amount needed to keep those plants green and spotless, as one source puts it, it really shows you the scale of the battle against nature they're fighting. We're talking about 31 different fungicides.
31. Just for fungus.
Just for the fungal diseases that thrive in the humidity. And get this, 11 of those are specifically flagged in the sources as bad actors. Meaning they're known to be particularly hazardous chemicals, carcinogens, endocrine disruptors, things like that.
Okay, so 31 fungicides, 11 of them nasty. What about the bugs? You mentioned hordes of bugs.
Yep. Then you add another 60 different pesticides for all those hoppers, beetles, worms attacking the plants. And again, 17 of those 60 pesticides are also labeled bad actors.
Good grief. So nearly 100 different chemicals in total. How is this even applied?
It's relentless. Dedicated crews applying cocktails of these things almost constantly. Spraying from tractors, fumigating the soil before planting. It's a chemical warfare operation just to hold back the natural environment.
This cost of making everything look the same, uniform and red,
Yeah.
it's staggering. How does this compare to, say, California? California grows a lot of tomatoes too, right? Mostly for processing, like ketchup.
They do. And California's system is industrialized too, make no mistake. But the climate there, especially the Central Valley, is much drier. It's much closer to what a tomato actually likes.
So they don't need as many chemicals.
Nowhere near as much. The contrast really drives home the cost of forcing the biology. The sources state an acre of Florida tomatoes gets 5 times more fungicide and 6 times more pesticide than an acre in California.
5 and 6 times more.
That difference, that's almost entirely the price of fighting Florida's humidity and pests. It's the industrial cost of ensuring someone in, say, Chicago can buy a red tomato in February.
And these chemicals, they don't just stay neatly on the plants or in the fields, do they? This leads us to the next big cost.
Yeah.
The public health side. Pesticide drift.
Exactly. That's the unavoidable consequence for the communities living nearby. These chemicals are sprayed so heavily and often right up against where people live and work, that drift is inevitable. The wind carries them.
How bad is it? Are there records?
Oh, yeah. The sources detail how in just 1 year, 2009, the Florida Department of Agriculture investigated 39 separate incidents, specific allegations of pesticide drift.
And these aren't just numbers. The sources mention specific cases, right? Real people affected.
Heartbreaking stories. Worshippers inside a Baptist church in Homestead exposed during a service. A school teacher in Sarasota forced onto medical leave after drift got into her elementary school with 500 kids inside.
500 kids. That's terrifying.
And what's really striking is how these fields are often situated. You find labor camps, RV parks, even retirement communities right next door, sometimes literally within the field boundary.
Potentially placed there.
Well, the land is cheap, and the workers need to be close. but it means the most vulnerable populations get the highest exposure. When the EPA proposed buffer zones back in 2007, keep the spraying a certain distance away, maybe 100 feet, maybe up to a quarter mile.
The growers fought it.
They fought it tooth and nail, insisted it would kill agriculture. They openly admitted they used the land right up to the boundaries.
Oh. So they basically
Yeah.
acknowledged the drift happens, but didn't want to give up even a small strip of land to protect people.
That's the implication. It highlights this really cynical calculation. Some buffer rules did eventually go into effect, but the fundamental model relies on this intensive edge-to-edge chemical use, knowing full well it's going to drift onto neighboring homes and schools. So you have this incredibly expensive system, right? Thousands per acre just on chemicals. How does it stay profitable? How can they sell these tomatoes so cheaply?
There must be a cost being squeezed somewhere else.
Exactly. They squeeze the only truly flexible input left, human labor. That's where the deep human cost comes in.
And this isn't exactly a new model, is it? Exploiting labor for cash crops has a long history.
A very long and very dark history. The sources make a direct connection. Think about sugar production in the New World, starting way back in the late 1400s.
Built on slavery.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Relied on the mass enslavement of Africans. And that system, huge scale, monoculture, treating workers as disposable tools to produce a high-volume commodity that's described as arguably the earliest prototype of an industrial process.
So that blueprint, massive scale, standardized product, cheap, expendable labor, that's basically the logic still operating in places like Immokalee, Florida today.
It's the ghost in the machine, absolutely. And think about how disconnected we are now. In rich countries like the U.S., maybe 1% of people are actually farmers. We have no idea who grows our food.
Total invisibility.
Total invisibility. And the labor that is there on the ground, it's increasingly migrant labor, temporary, precarious. The number of workers coming in on certain agricultural visas, for instance, it doubled just between 2011 and 2016. That's a huge increase.
And it's not like these workers just randomly decided to come pick tomatoes, right? There are bigger forces at play that push them here.
Huge forces. Many of these workers, especially from Mexico, were farmers. They had their own land.
So what happened?
NAFTA happened. That's what the sources point to. After NAFTA passed in '94, Mexico had to open its borders to heavily subsidize U.S. grain, especially corn.
Ah, so cheap American corn flooded the Mexican market.
Exactly. U.S. agribusiness, backed by government subsidies, could sell corn in Mexico for way less than local farmers could afford to produce it. It decimated rural farming communities in Mexico.
Creating, as one source puts it, a direct link between government agricultural policies in the U.S. and rural misery in Mexico.
It created a displaced population, a desperate, ready-made labor force for U.S. farms, including the giant tomato operations down in Florida.
So let's zero in on Immokalee, Florida. That's kind of ground zero for this, right? The winter tomato capital. What's the reality for workers there?
The core issue is what researchers call a normalized geography of farm worker invisibility. They're there, but they're not seen. And this is made much worse by this intense fear of detention and deportation. There's a term used in the sources, encerrado, shut in, locked in, trapped.
Trapped by fear. How does that play out? I remember seeing some striking details on the sources about that.
It dictates everything. Detentions often happen when people leave their homes or work sites, so they literally feel confined to their trailers or the fields. You see these visible signs of fear, like the sources describe, workers using flattened cardboard boxes or old bed sheets, often with cartoon characters on them.
To cover their windows?
To block the windows of their homes. It's a defense mechanism, literally trying to block the outside world's view in and maybe blocking their own view out because of this constant threat.
That's incredibly bleak. And when the spotlight does occasionally hit these conditions, the low pay, the terrible housing, sometimes actual cases of modern slavery, what's the typical response from, say, politicians or the industry?
Often, the focus shifts immediately to, well, welfare. Providing relief, like better housing rather than tackling the root, causes the rock-bottom wages, the lack of power, the systemic exploitation.
So fix the symptom, not the disease.
Pretty much. There are examples of genuinely good efforts, like an organization called Rural Neighborhoods, led by a guy named Kirk. The sources detail how they used over $200 million in federal funds USDA money, tax credits, to build over 1,300 affordable apartments. That housed over 4,500 people in places like Immokalee. That's real.
That's definitely important work. People need safe housing.
Yeah.
But you're saying there's a catch. or a cynical side to it.
Well, Kirk himself is surprisingly candid about the political dynamic.
Yeah.
He described it, and this is a chilling quote from the sources, "We let them co-opt us, and we co-opt them."
Wow. What does that mean, co-opt?
He suggested that political officials love funding tangible things like housing, especially when they're, quote, taking heat for working conditions. It looks good. It's a visible solution.
Ah, I see. So funding affordable housing becomes a way for the system, the politicians, maybe the industry indirectly, to kind of buy goodwill and make the pressure about bad labor practices go away.
Without actually changing the labor practices themselves?
So they help build a house with government money, which is good. But they keep the wages so low that the person living in that house could never dream of affording it on their own in a normal market.
That's the dynamic. The core exploitation, the low wages that make the cheap tomato possible, that stays untouched. They address the visible crisis of housing, which is framed as a welfare issue, while preserving the wage structure that actually causes the need for subsidized housing in the first place. It's a neat trick, really. Hashtag ShackFV. The philosophy of cheap uniformity.
Okay, so this standardized red tomato,
Mhm.
it's not just a food item. It's like a symbol, isn't it? A physical product of this whole philosophy driving industrial food.
Absolutely. It perfectly embodies the obsession with cheap uniformity.
Why is uniformity so important to the system?
Because it makes everything simple, predictable. If every tomato weighs the same, looks the same, lasts the same amount of time on a truck or a shelf, it radically simplifies these massive, complex, global supply chains. A buyer knows exactly what they're getting, whether it's January or June.
I remember reading the chef Dan Barber on this. He calls it dumbing down nature.
That's a great phrase for it. He says it makes everything taste the same. A tomato, a chicken breast, whatever it is, doesn't matter if you're eating it in Scarsdale or Scottsdale in June or January, total homogeneity.
And his point was, it doesn't just dumb down nature.
It dumbs us down, too. That's the really profound part. When all you ever encounter is the one standard, flavorless version, you stop expecting anything else. You stop recognizing complexity or real quality. Our taste buds literally get trained for industrial blandness.
And this drive for predictability, for turning nature into standard units,
Yeah.
that's a core feature of how capitalism works with ecosystems, isn't it? I think William Cronon wrote about that.
Yes, the historian Cronon. He pointed out that under this system, things get valued not for what they are, how nutritious, how flavorful, their connection to a place, but purely for their market price. What they'll fetch when traded as a commodity on the global market. Commerce trumps connection.
Which leads to this really powerful, almost philosophical conflict described in the sources. Something about yield versus loot.
Ah, yes. That comes from the geographer Carl Sauer, a really insightful critique. He argued that Americans in particular have not yet learned the difference between yield and loot.
Okay, break that down. Yield versus loot. What's the difference?
It's about sustainability, about your whole approach to resources. Loot is grabbing everything you can right now. Maximum extraction, maximum short-term profit, with zero thought for the future, for whether the land or the system can actually sustain it. Looting is basically stealing from the future to benefit the present. Yield is what you can sustainably harvest year after year. It's working with the ecosystem, understanding its limits, ensuring it stays healthy and productive for generations to come. Yield is about long-term thinking.
So the Florida tomato system, with its chemical dependency and labor exploitation,
Yeah.
that sounds like textbook loot.
It's a perfect example. Maximum output now, regardless of the long-term damage to the soil, the water, the people. And Sauer argued this isn't new. It's part of a long American pattern of economic prodigality alongside ecological abundance. We had so much, we just took it.
And the result of this loot philosophy in agriculture is clear, right? We get quantity.
We get massive gains in food quantity. Absolutely. More calories per person than ever before in history. But as Michael Pollan points out, it comes directly at the expense of food quality. Nutrition goes down, complexity disappears, flavor vanishes.
And the chemistry.
Yeah.
The synthetic fertilizer. That was key to enabling this whole loot approach, wasn't it? Before that, farming had to be more about yield.
Absolutely critical. Before the Haber-Bosch process was invented in the early 20th century.
That's the process for making synthetic nitrogen fertilizer.
Exactly. Before that, farming was fundamentally limited by biology. You needed nitrogen for plants to grow, and the main way to get it was through natural cycles, manure, composting, and especially planting legumes like clover or beans that could pull nitrogen from the air and fix it in the soil.
So you had to rotate crops. You had to maintain soil health. It forced a kind of ecological thinking.
It forced a focus on long-term yield, but Haber-Bosch broke that link, suddenly you could make nitrogen fertilizer synthetically, cheaply, on a massive industrial scale using fossil fuels.
So you didn't need healthy soil or complex rotations anymore.
You could just pour nitrogen onto depleted soil and still get a crop. It basically allowed farmers to bypass ecological limits. It enabled monocultures, like the Florida tomatoes, to be grown year after year in places they shouldn't be. It made the philosophy of loot economically viable on a global scale.
Okay, so if the industrial tomato represents loot, this short-term, extractive, chemical-dependent model, what's the alternative? What does a system based on yield look like?
The alternative is really about moving away from that specialization and uniformity. It's about embracing diversity and ecological principles. Some call it moving toward a small farm future, one that emphasizes agricultural diversity.
So instead of one giant field of just tomatoes.
You'd have complexity, different crops growing together, animals integrated into the system. Think about practices like regenerative agriculture or permaculture.
What's the core idea there?
They try to build tight local cycles for nutrients and water. Instead of importing synthetic fertilizer made with fossil fuels from halfway around the world, you try to generate fertility on the farm itself. You look at the whole landscape as a connected system.
And the goal isn't just maximizing one thing, like tomato tonnage.
Right. The goal is resilience, health, long-term productivity. One source has this great line. The aim is that nothing does only one thing. A plant isn't just a crop. Maybe it also fixes nitrogen or attracts beneficial insects or holds the soil. It's about working with nature's complexity, not trying to obliterate it for the sake of standardization. It's about yield, not loot. #tag VSIs.
So let's pull this all together. We started with that seemingly simple, perfect red tomato in the supermarket. Cheap, always there.
Mm-hmm.
But as we've unpacked its journey, it turns out it's actually incredibly expensive. Once you factor in the insane chemical load, the environmental damage, the displacement and exploitation of human beings needed to put it on the shelf year-round.
Exactly. The food policy expert, Marion Nessel, puts it very clearly. Ethical problems pop up whenever something that benefits one group, like consumers getting cheap, convenient food, directly harms another group.
The workers, the environment, maybe small farmers, crowded out by the industrial scale.
Precisely. Our convenience, the convenience of that industrial tomato, it depends entirely on injustice being normalized, on us being separated morally and physically from where our food comes from.
And it's sobering to realize this isn't just a modern issue. This pattern has deep roots in how our whole economy developed.
Deep, deep roots. The sources connect it right back to the foundations of the industrial world. The whole idea of industrializing food, which eventually led to our tomato, it started centuries ago for a very specific reason: to create cheap calories to feed factory workers.
You mean like during the Industrial Revolution?
Exactly. Things like the potato and especially sugar produced by enslaved people. They were fundamental. They provided the cheap, dense energy needed to fuel the workers who ran the machines that drove quantitative economic growth.
Wow. So from 18th century sugar plantations to 21st century Florida tomato fields, the basic function of industrial food has often been just to provide cheap fuel for the economic machine, right? Even if quality or humanity gets lost along the way.
That's the historical thread. Which brings us, I think, to the final really provocative question for you, the listener. If the main point of that standardized tomato is just to be cheap economic fuel, what happens when you choose differently?
Yeah.
What happens when you start making choices based on other things? Based on flavor, based on where it came from, who grew it, based on traceability, on complexity. When you consciously choose quality over uniformity, ethics over cheapness, what does that do?
How does that choice ripple back through the system?
Yeah. What power do you actually hold when you prioritize taste and maybe fairness over just grabbing the cheapest, most uniform option? Does that decision start to challenge the whole logic of loot, the very foundation of this industrial food system we've inherited?
Something to think about next time you're in the produce aisle. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive.